How does a man, hailed as a genius and a pioneer of the modern stock market, willingly choose to destroy thousands of lives, including his own family, for a secret that netted him nothing but years of fabricated numbers? The most extensive psychological analysis of this Wall Street legend point to a chilling confluence of traits, a grandiose sense of self-importance, and a profound lack of empathy, and an almost clinical level of manipulative cunning. We will examine the behavioral patterns that allowed the deception and the deep-seated psychological needs it fulfilled. Welcome. I'm a licensed professional counselor, and this is my mental health analysis of Bernie Madoff case. I will be focusing on the main mental health and psychological indicators while providing the backstory. I don't just talk about the crimes. I talk about the psychology behind the crimes and the mysteries that captivate us. I look beyond the facts of the case to understand the why of the crime. The first and most compelling psychological indicator we see is the need for absolute control and the almost theatrical way Madoff's firm, Bernie Madoff Investment Securities, was structured to cultivate an image of untouchable brilliance. My analysis is based on my speculations. It's not a diagnosis of anyone involved in this case. Madoff's early life, while seemingly unremarkable on the surface, laid the groundwork for this psychological need for control. He grew up in a middle-class family in Queens, New York, and started his firm in 1960 with a modest $5,000 that he earned from lifeguarding and installing sprinklers. From the very beginning, there was a drive for not just success, but a kind of proprietary mastery. He became a pioneer in automated trading, helping to develop the NASDAQ, and became its non-executive chairman. This was not just a successful businessman. This was a man who helped build the very infrastructure of the modern financial world. The role gave him tremendous legitimacy and access, but more importantly, it positioned him as an insider, someone who understood the system better than any regulators themselves. The true crime, the Ponzi scheme, operated in a completely separate secret office on the 17th floor of the Lipstick Building in Manhattan. The public-facing legitimate market-making firm occupied the 19th floor. This physical compartmentalization is a profound psychological clue. It suggests a clear mental separation between the ethical and the fraudulent, allowing him to maintain the facade of a financial titan, while the deceit grew quietly beneath the surface. He was literally running two lives under one roof. This need for control manifested in his investment businesses through an intense aura of exclusivity. You couldn't just give Madoff your money. You had to be invited. This created a scarcity principle, which is a powerful psychological tool. If something is difficult to obtain, people perceive it as more valuable. By rejecting potential investors, he reinforced the idea that his fund was an elite privileged opportunity, making those who were admitted feel special and immensely trusting. This exclusivity and tight control were a brilliant shield against scrutiny. The clients who were in didn't dare question him for fear of being ejected from the most exclusive club on Wall Street. The consistent manufactured returns of around 10 to 20%, regardless of market conditions, were the ultimate hook. They were high enough to be alluring, but not so outlandish as to immediately raise a red flag. This constant moderate success was its own form of control, managing the investors' expectations and keeping them contently blind. The most shocking psychological angle in the Madoff case is the staggering lack of empathy required to sustain fraud for so long. Several psychological assessments have suggested that Madoff exhibited a significant number of traits consistent with corporate psychopathy. Again, I want to be clear, this is based on analysis of his behavior, it's not my clinical diagnosis of him. Psychopathy is a personality construct characterized by enduring antisocial behavior, impaired empathy and remorse, and a bold, calculating, manipulative traits. Madoff's actions align disturbingly well with this profile. Consider his victims. He specifically targeted his own social circle, friends, family, and most devastatingly, the Jewish community, what is known as an affinity fraud. He preyed on shared identity, trust, and religious bonds. He even took money from a Holocaust survivor, numerous Jewish charities, and countless individuals' life savings. To look a family friend in the eye, assure them their nest egg is safe, and know you are systematically destroying their financial future requires an emotional detachment that goes beyond mere greed. This points to a key psychopathic indicator, a callousness and a deception, a master of cultivating trust. He was charming, articulate, and well respected. He didn't have to break down a door or hold a weapon. His weapon was a forged account statement and an air of utter certainty. His ability to compartmentalize and rationalize his behavior over 20 years is crucial to understanding the psychological why. When asked why, he continued, Madoff reportedly spoke of waiting for someone to catch me. This is a classic deflection, an attempt to shift responsibility. The narrative of I was caught in a trap and needed a way out attempts to paint him as the victim of circumstance, not as a deliberate, malicious architect of ruin. The fact is, the lie started small, as he once described a slippery slope that began with him struggling to generate the promised returns and taking the temporary measure of using new investor money to pay old investors. But he didn't stop there. He didn't wind it down. Instead, he aggressively expanded it, continually inviting new people into his web of deceit, an act that demonstrates not a slip, but a bold, excitement-seeking escalation. The thrill of getting away with it, of fooling the smartest people in the world, including the SEC, likely became a powerful internal psychological reward that sustained the fraud. The inevitable collapse of the scheme reveals the ultimate motive, the preservation of the grandiose self-image. Madoff was not driven by the need for vast liquid wealth. Much of the money was simply cycled through his bank account. He was driven by the need to be the most admired, most powerful man in the room. The money was simply a means to an end, and that end was the affirmation of a supreme financial genius. When the 2008 financial crisis hit, the psychological game was up. The consistent returns, which had been his badge of honor, now became his undoing. While the world's legitimate investments plummeted, Madoff stayed miraculously stable. This consistency was too perfect, too impossible. The flood of redemption requests he faced forced his hand, and he finally confessed the truth to his two sons, Mark and Andrew. This confession represents the moment his sense of invulnerability, a key psychological trait, was finally shattered. He wasn't caught by the regulators he had outsmarted for years. He was exposed to his family, the people who saw him as their father and their mentor. The ensuing betrayal was not just financial, but deeply personal and familial, a trauma that would lead to tragic psychological consequences. The betrayal of his sons is the most potent example of his impaired moral compass. Andrew described his father's actions as a father-son betrayal of biblical proportions. Mark, unable to process the shame and catastrophic loss of reputation and identity, died by suicide 2 years later. This ultimate act of self-harm speaks volumes about the psychological devastation caused by Madoff's deception, not only to his victims, but to his own immediate circle. The criminal's lack of remorse following his conviction further solidifies the psychological analysis. Even from prison, he continued to claim that his victims were greedy and that he was merely catering to their desires, shifting the blame away from himself. This consistent pattern of externalizing blame, a common defense mechanism in psychopathy, allows the individual to maintain their self-concept as superior and undeserving of punishment. He continued to protect his image until the very end. It's crucial to pivot from the perpetrator's psychology to the immense psychological and mental health toll on the victims. The scale of the Madoff fraud was so vast and the betrayal so intimate that it led to a phenomenon researchers have termed fraud trauma syndrome. This is not just a financial stress. It's a profound trauma that mirrors symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. Studies on the Madoff's victims found that over half met the criteria for presumptive PTSD, reporting high levels of anxiety, depression, insomnia, and health-related problems. The key psychological mechanism at play here is the loss of trust in everything. They trusted a friend, a community leader, a revered financial system, and their very own judgment. The fraud stripped them of their money, but it also stripped them of their sense of security, their social identity, and their faith in their own decision-making. The shame and guilt experienced by many victims, feeling foolish for having been fooled, often prevented them from seeking legal or even emotional help, mirroring the psychological barriers faced by victims of other forms of interpersonal abuse. This element of betrayal-based trauma is a clue that makes the Madoff case stand out. It wasn't a stranger stealing from them. It was an insider who exploited the very bonds of trust that make up the community. The psychological impact is not just about the money lost, but the moral injury of being profoundly and personally betrayed. This is a case that was widely talked about years ago. You probably remember this case. And it's a really interesting to think about how this is corporate psychopathy and that there was an actual term, fraud syndrome. And so this impact created a ripple wave around the U.S. and the financial markets. And it really gave us an inside view of who to trust and who not to trust, what to do with our money. We have to be cautious of everything that we do. We never know, you can't know by looking at somebody if they're going to take advantage of you. You have to be wise and use the best of your ability and invest wisely. I can't imagine the psychological toll this must have had on those who trusted Madoff and invested and found out that their money was gone. It was devastating, and probably many people are still suffering from it. So what did you think about this case? Were there any elements that stood out to you? Let me know. If you want more mental health analysis of true crime stories like this one, be sure to subscribe for more. And if you found this case compelling, be sure to watch this next story. It will make you more aware of your surroundings. Thank you for joining me today. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe.